The day started with a scratchy throat and a pounding headache. I debated pushing through and going to work anyway, but Rebecca insisted I stay home. "You'll only make it worse," she said, her tone filled with concern. "Get some rest, and I'll check on you later." Rebecca had always been nurturing, the kind of partner who made chicken soup from scratch and left notes on the counter reminding me to drink water. So, when she kissed me on the forehead before leaving for work, I thought nothing of it. I spent most of the morning dozing on the couch, the TV playing softly in the background. Around noon, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the coffee table. It was a text from Rebecca. "How are you feeling? Let me know if you need anything." I replied with a quick thanks and assured her I was fine. She responded almost immediately. "Good. Don't worry about dinner tonight. I'll take care of it." It was a sweet message, but something about it struck me as odd. Rebecca never texted during work hours, she was usually in back-to-back meetings. Shrugging it off, I turned on a movie and settled back into the couch. Around 2 p.m., I heard the faint hum of a car engine outside. At first, I assumed it was a delivery truck or a neighbor. But when I glanced out the window, I froze. It was Rebecca's car. I frowned, confused. She hadn't mentioned coming home early, and she usually texted if her plans changed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked through the blinds as she stepped out of the car. She wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize was with her. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with an air of confidence. My heart sank as I watched Rebecca laugh at something he said, her body language relaxed and warm. She led him up the front steps, her hand briefly brushing against his arm before unlocking the door. I ducked out of sight, my mind racing. Who was this man? And why was Rebecca bringing him into our home? The sound of their voices floated down the hall as they entered the living room. I crept to the edge of the hallway, my heart pounding as I listened. "Are you sure it's okay to do this here?" the man asked, his tone casual but low. "It's fine," Rebecca replied. "He's sick and won't leave the bedroom all day." The man chuckled softly. "Convenient." I clenched my fists, struggling to control my breathing. What were they talking about? Rebecca's voice turned serious. "We need to be careful. If he finds out." The man interrupted her. "Relax. He won't." The words sent a chill down my spine. I retreated to the bedroom, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Was this what I thought it was? Was Rebecca cheating on me, right under my nose? But there was something about their exchange that didn't entirely add up. Their tone wasn't romantic, it was calculated. Determined to find out the truth, I pulled out my phone and activated the voice recorder app. Then I slipped it into the hallway near the living room, hidden behind a decorative vase. The next hour was agonizing. I could hear faint murmurs of their conversation but couldn't make out the words. Finally, I heard the front door open and close. I retrieved my phone and played back the recording. At first, their conversation was mundane, discussing work and logistics. But then, the man's voice lowered. "Everything's in place. You'll get the first payment tomorrow." Rebecca replied, her voice firm. "And you're sure there's no way this can be traced back to me?" "Positive," the man said confidently. "By the time anyone figures it out, we'll be long gone." My stomach dropped. Payment? Traced? Long gone? This wasn't just an affair. It was something much bigger, and much darker. I replayed the recording over and over, each word twisting the knife deeper. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Rebecca was involved in something secretive, something serious. My first thought was to confront her immediately, demand answers, and get to the bottom of it. But I stopped myself. Whatever she was doing, it was big enough for her to worry about being traced. If I tipped her off too soon, I might never uncover the full truth. Instead, I decided to gather more evidence. That evening, Rebecca came home with her usual smile, carrying a bag of groceries. "How are you feeling?" she asked, setting the bag on the counter. "Better," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks for taking care of dinner." "Of course," she said, leaning over to kiss my forehead. "You need to rest." Her warmth and affection felt like a cruel joke. Every word, every gesture, felt tainted by the recording I'd overheard. As she cooked dinner, I casually asked, "Did anything interesting happen at work today?" She shook her head without missing a beat. Same old, same old. Just meetings and emails." Her lie was seamless, and it made my chest tighten. Later that night, while Rebecca showered, I searched her purse. My hands shook as I rifled through her belongings, looking for anything that might explain her conversation with the stranger. At first, I found nothing unusual: her wallet, keys, and a few receipts from grocery stores and cafes. But then I found an envelope tucked into a side pocket. Inside was a single piece of paper with a string of numbers and letters written in neat handwriting. AX4903T. It didn't look like a bank account or a phone number. I took a photo of it before carefully returning the envelope to its place. The next day, I decided to follow Rebecca. She left the house at 8:30 a.m., dressed smartly for work. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. At first, her route was normal, her usual drive to the office downtown. But halfway there, she took an unexpected turn, heading toward the industrial district. I stayed a safe distance behind her as she pulled into the parking lot of a small, unmarked building. She got out of the car, carrying a briefcase, and entered through a side door. I parked a block away and waited. 2 hours passed before Rebecca emerged, accompanied by the same man I'd seen at the house. They spoke briefly before she handed him the briefcase and got back into her car. I snapped a few photos, my heart racing. Who was this man? And what was Rebecca giving him? I sent the photos to Marcus, a private investigator I'd worked with on a business matter years ago. "I need you to find out who this guy is," I said when he called. Marcus chuckled softly. "You always bring me the interesting cases, don't you? Give me a day or two." That evening, I searched the phrase AX4903T online but came up empty. Frustrated, I stared at the photo I'd taken, trying to make sense of it. Was it a code? A password? Rebecca came home shortly after, her smile as bright as ever. "Work was crazy today," she said, kicking off her heels. "Yeah?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded, pouring herself a glass of wine. "You wouldn't believe the number of fires I had to put out." The lie stung, but I kept my expression neutral. The next morning, Marcus called with an update. "Your mystery man is named Alan Pierce," he said. "He's a consultant, or at least, that's what he claims. He's been involved in a few questionable deals, mostly around moving money and assets." "Questionable how?" I asked, my chest tightening. "Let's just say he has a habit of disappearing right before things fall apart," Marcus said. "If your wife is working with him, she might be caught in something messy." "Messy like what?" "Fraud, embezzlement, or worse," Marcus said grimly. The words sent a chill down my spine. That evening, I confronted Rebecca. "Who's Alan?" I asked as she cooked dinner. She froze, her back to me. "Alan," she repeated, her tone carefully neutral. "Yes," I said, stepping closer. "I saw you with him yesterday. I know you've been meeting him." Rebecca turned slowly, her face pale. "You've been following me?" "I had to," I said. "Because you've been lying to me." Her lips trembled, but she didn't deny it. "What's going on, Rebecca?" I demanded. "What are you involved in?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't tell you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Why not? I asked, my voice rising. Because it's safer if you don't know, she whispered. Safer for who? I snapped. Me? Or you? Rebecca's silence was deafening. Rebecca's silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Her tears welled up, but she refused to meet my gaze. Rebecca, I said, my voice shaking. If you're in some kind of trouble, I need to know. I can't help you if you keep shutting me out. She wiped her eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. It's not that simple, Daniel. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, I said, my frustration boiling over. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're wrapped up in something illegal and dangerous. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to tell me everything. But then she shook her head. I can't, she whispered. I clenched my fists, anger and helplessness warring inside me. That night, Rebecca barely spoke to me, retreating to the bedroom early. I stayed up, pacing the living room as I tried to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. Alan P.S. The briefcase. The cryptic string of numbers. What was Rebecca doing? And why was she so adamant about keeping me in the dark? The next morning, I called Marcus. She won't talk, I said, my voice heavy. She says it's safer if I don't know. Marcus sighed. That's not a good sign. She's in deep, Daniel, whatever this is. I need to figure out what that code means, I said, referring to the AX4903T string. It has to be connected to this. I'll look into it, Marcus said. In the meantime, keep an eye on her. If she's meeting Alan again, we need to know when and where. That afternoon, Rebecca left the house, saying she had a work meeting downtown. I followed her again, staying several car lengths behind. This time, she went to a bank. I parked across the street and watched as she walked inside, clutching a folder tightly against her chest. 30 minutes later, she emerged, her expression tense as she got into her car and drove away. I waited until she was out of sight before heading into the bank myself. At the counter, I asked about recent account activity, pretending to be curious about the bank's services. The teller was polite but unhelpful, until I casually mentioned the code. I noticed something about a transaction with the code AX4903T, I said, feigning ignorance. Can you tell me what that means? The teller frowned. That's an internal code for large asset transfers. Do you have an account with us? No, I said quickly. I must have misunderstood. Thanks anyway. I walked out of the bank, my mind racing. Large asset transfers? Was Rebecca moving money? And if so, whose money was it? That evening, Marcus called with more information. Remember Alan Pierce, he said. Yeah, I replied, gripping the phone tightly. Well, I found a connection, Marcus said. He's been working as a middleman for a larger operation, a group that specializes in money laundering and off-the-record transactions. My stomach dropped. And Rebecca? I think she's been roped into helping them, Marcus said. That code you found? It's tied to a shell company they use to disguise illegal transfers. The room spun around me. Are you saying Rebecca's laundering money? It looks that way, Marcus said grimly. When Rebecca came home that night, I was waiting for her. Did you go to the bank today? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Her eyes flicked toward me, and I saw the flicker of panic before she masked it. I had some errands to run, she said lightly, setting her bag on the counter. Cut the act, Rebecca, I said, my voice rising. I know about the asset transfers. I know about Alan Pierce. And I know you're hiding something huge from me. She froze, her face pale. How do you know about Alan? She whispered. It doesn't matter, I said. What matters is that you've been lying to me for weeks, maybe months. So tell me the truth. Now. Rebecca collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling as she buried her face in them. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said, her voice muffled. Find out what? I pressed. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. They're blackmailing me, Daniel. I didn't have a choice. Her confession sent a chill down my spine. Blackmailing you with what? I asked. Rebecca hesitated, then said, I made a mistake. At work. I mishandled some client accounts, and it created a hole in the books. Alan found out and threatened to expose me unless I helped him move money. I stared at her, disbelief and anger swelling inside me. So instead of coming to me, you decided to work with criminals? I asked, my voice sharp. I was scared, she cried. I thought if I just did what they wanted, it would all go away. Her words hung in the air, a mix of desperation and regret. For the first time, I realized how deep the hole Rebecca had dug herself into. She wasn't just lying to me, she was drowning, and her choices had put us both in danger. We're going to fix this, I said firmly. Rebecca looked up at me, her eyes filled with doubt. How? I clenched my fists, my resolve hardening. By taking them down before they destroy us. Rebecca's confession shattered the last semblance of normalcy in our lives. The weight of her actions, and the danger they posed, pressed down on us both. As much as I wanted to scream at her for keeping this from me, I knew that anger wouldn't solve anything. The first step was figuring out how to get her out of this mess without putting us in even more danger. The next morning, I met with Marcus at a quiet diner. Rebecca had reluctantly agreed to let him help, though her trust in him was understandably shaky. She told me everything, I said as Marcus stirred his coffee. He raised an eyebrow. Everything? She's being blackmailed by Alan. She made a mistake at work, something about client accounts, and he's using it to force her to launder money. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. It fits with what I found. Alan's been tied to a series of similar cases, blackmailing professionals to move money through shell companies. He picks people who are vulnerable, then traps them in his web. Can we take this to the police? I asked. Not yet, Marcus said. We need solid evidence. If we act too soon, Alan could retaliate, or disappear. What do you suggest? Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. We use Rebecca to gather proof. If she can record her next interaction with Alan, documents, conversations, anything incriminating, we'll have enough to bring him down. When I told Rebecca about Marcus's plan, she was understandably terrified. What if he finds out? She asked, her voice shaking. What if this blows up in our faces? We'll be careful, I assured her. Marcus has experience with this kind of thing. We'll make sure you're safe. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Okay. I'll do it. The next day, Marcus helped Rebecca prepare for her upcoming meeting with Alan. He equipped her with a discreet recording device hidden in a pendant necklace and coached her on how to steer the conversation toward incriminating details. This has to feel natural, Marcus said. Don't push too hard, or he'll get suspicious. Rebecca nodded, though the fear in her eyes was evident. On the evening of the meeting, Rebecca left the house, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag. I'm scared, Daniel, she whispered as we stood by the front door. I know, I said, pulling her into a hug. But you're not alone. We'll get through this. She nodded, her resolve hardening as she stepped out into the night. Marcus and I followed at a safe distance, monitoring Rebecca's movements through the recording device. Alan had instructed her to meet him at a secluded warehouse on the edge of town, a setting that only added to the tension. When Rebecca arrived, Alan was already waiting. You're late, he said, his tone clipped. Traffic, Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the fear I knew she felt. Alan gestured for her to follow him inside. Through the audio feed, Marcus and I listened as Alan outlined his next demand. "I need you to move another $200,000 by Friday," he said. "Same process as before. Use the account linked to AX4903T. Rebecca hesitated. "Alan, this is getting risky. If anyone at work notices..." "They won't," Alan interrupted, his tone sharp. "You've done this before. Just stick to the plan." "What happens if I don't?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling. Alan's laugh was cold. "Let's not find out." Rebecca pressed him further, her voice wavering. "And after this? Will it be over?" Alan smirked. "Sure. One last job, and we are done." His casual tone made my blood boil. It was clear he had no intention of letting her go. As the meeting ended, Rebecca handed Alan a folder containing fake documents Marcus had prepared. They were designed to look legitimate but contained markers that would link them directly to Alan if he attempted to use them. Alan seemed satisfied as he took the folder. "Good. You're finally getting the hang of this." Once Alan left, Rebecca exited the warehouse and got into her car, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. "Is it over?" she asked through the comms. "For now," Marcus replied. "You did great, Rebecca. Now let's see if it's enough to bring him down." Back at Marcus's office, we reviewed the recording. Alan's words, combined with the documents he'd taken, painted a clear picture of his criminal operation. "This is solid," Marcus said. "With this, we can go to the police." Rebecca looked relieved but still wary. "And what happens to me?" Marcus sighed. "You'll need to cooperate fully. If the police see that you were coerced and helped build the case, they'll likely go easy on you." Rebecca nodded, though the fear in her eyes remained. That night, as we lay in bed, Rebecca turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever get past this?" she asked softly. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we have to try." She nodded, her tears soaking into her pillow as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Daniel. For all of it." I reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "We'll get through this. Together." The next morning, Marcus contacted the police, providing them with the evidence we'd gathered. "This is enough to take Alan down," the lead investigator said. "We'll handle it from here." That evening, Marcus called with an update. "Alan's been arrested," he said. And the documents Rebecca gave him linked him to several other laundering schemes. "It's over." Relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. The ordeal had left scars on our marriage, and I knew rebuilding trust would take time. But for the first time in months, it felt like we had a chance. Alan's arrest was a major victory, but the aftermath left Rebecca and me standing at the edge of an uncertain future. The weight of her choices and the betrayal of my trust weren't things we could easily forget, even if the immediate danger had passed. The police kept Rebecca in the loop as they built their case against Alan, using the documents and recordings we'd provided. She agreed to cooperate fully, attending meetings with investigators and giving detailed statements about her involvement. The lead detective on the case assured us, given her cooperation and the clear evidence of coercion, she's unlikely to face charges. The DA will see her as a witness, not a suspect. Rebecca was relieved, but I could tell the guilt still weighed heavily on her. At home, the tension between us was palpable. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers learning to navigate unfamiliar terrain. One evening, after another silent dinner, Rebecca finally spoke. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling. "But I need to know, do you hate me?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't hate you, Rebecca. I'm angry, And I'm hurt, but I don't hate you. Tears welled up in her eyes. I hate myself for what I've done to us. You made a mistake, I said softly. A terrible one. But we have to decide if we are willing to move forward, or if this is where we stop. Rebecca reached across the table, her hand trembling as it touched mine. I want to move forward. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. To rebuild trust, we started seeing a couples therapist. The sessions were grueling, forcing us to confront not only Rebecca's deception but also the cracks in our marriage that had gone unnoticed for years. You've both been living in survival mode, the therapist said during one session. Rebecca made poor choices because she felt trapped, but Daniel, you've admitted that you were distant and preoccupied. Healing requires you both to take responsibility and commit to real change. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to walk away, days when the anger and betrayal felt too overwhelming to bear. But there were also moments of clarity, small glimpses of the connection we'd once shared. Meanwhile, the case against Alan gained traction. News of his arrest made headlines, and the details of his operation sent shockwaves through the community. Alan's connections run deep, Marcus said during one of our meetings. He's burned a lot of bridges, which means a lot of people are eager to see him go down. Marcus's work wasn't done yet. He continued digging into Alan's network, identifying other players involved in the scheme. Rebecca wasn't the only one he blackmailed, Marcus said. There's a pattern here: doctors, accountants, lawyers. He targeted professionals with vulnerabilities and used them to move money. The revelation made me realize how easily Rebecca could have been replaced by someone else. Alan hadn't cared about her, she'd just been a convenient pawn. Rebecca's career took a hit, even though the police cleared her of wrongdoing. She resigned from her position, knowing the scrutiny would make it impossible to continue. I'll start over, she said one evening as we discussed her next steps. I don't know where or how, but I'll figure it out. I'll support you, I said, meaning it. One day, Marcus called with unexpected news. Alan's singing, he said. What do you mean? I asked. He's cooperating with investigators, Marcus explained. He's naming names, exposing higher-ups in the operation. It looks like he's trying to cut a deal. Rebecca, who had overheard the conversation, looked panicked. What does that mean for us? It means you're safer, Marcus said. Alan's information will bring down the entire operation, making it less likely for anyone to come after you. The relief was palpable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the damage to our lives was already done. That night, Rebecca and I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. The air was cool and still, a stark contrast to the chaos we'd endured. Do you think we'll ever be okay again? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved and trusted for years, and felt a mix of hope and uncertainty. I think we'll have to figure out what okay means now, I said. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I'm ready to fight for us, Daniel. No matter how long it takes. I reached for her hand, holding it tightly. Me too. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in months, it felt like we were walking it together. The weeks after Alan's arrest were marked by cautious steps toward normalcy. Rebecca and I were no longer walking on eggshells, but the scars of the ordeal lingered, shaping every interaction. Trust, once shattered, wasn't something that could be glued back together overnight. Rebecca began rebuilding her life in small but deliberate ways. She applied for new jobs, though the weight of her resignation and the circumstances around it made her hesitant to dive back into her field. I feel like I'm starting from scratch, she admitted one evening as she updated her resume. Starting over isn't a bad thing, I said, offering her a reassuring smile. It's a chance to rebuild something stronger. Her lips quirked into a faint smile. I hope you're right. Our therapy sessions became a lifeline, providing a safe space to unpack the pain and mistrust that had taken root in our marriage. I feel like I failed you, Rebecca said during one session, her voice trembling. You didn't fail me, I replied, my tone firm. You made a mistake, and it hurt us both. But we are still here. That counts for something. Our therapist encouraged us to focus on small victories, moments of connection, honest conversations, and shared laughter. Rebuilding trust is about consistency, she said. It's about showing up for each other, day after day. Meanwhile, the case against Alan continued to unfold. His cooperation with law enforcement revealed a sprawling network of illegal activities, from money laundering to corporate fraud. The scope of his operation was staggering, and his betrayal of his associates ensured that many of them were brought to justice. Marcus kept me updated on the case, though his tone was always cautious. Alan's deal doesn't erase the damage he's done, Marcus said during one call. But it ensures he won't be walking free anytime soon. Rebecca's role in exposing Alan earned her quiet praise from the authorities, though she avoided any public attention. I don't want to be seen as a hero, she said. I just want to move on. One day, Rebecca received an offer for a job at a small nonprofit. The position was a step down from her previous role, but it offered her a chance to start fresh. I think I'll take it, she said, her eyes bright with a mix of hope and apprehension. I think you should, I said. It's a new chapter. With time, the tension between us began to ease. Rebecca no longer avoided my gaze or tiptoed around difficult conversations. I, in turn, made an effort to be more present, more attuned to the nuances of our relationship that I'd once taken for granted. There were still difficult days when a careless comment or a stray thought reopened old wounds. But there were also moments of genuine connection, moments that reminded us why we'd fought so hard to stay together. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Rebecca turned to me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Her words were simple but carried the weight of everything we'd been through. I didn't give up, I said. Because I knew there was something worth saving. Months later, we stood in the kitchen, laughing as we prepared dinner together. The tension that had once filled the house was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I think we are going to be okay, Rebecca said, her smile reaching her eyes. Yeah, I said, pulling her into a hug. I think so too. Our journey wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past would always be a part of us. But we'd learned how to weather the storms together, emerging stronger and more committed than ever.